Anyway, it's tempting to see the stock market crash as the cause of the Depression, possibly because it turns American economic history into a morality play. But the truth is that the stock market crash and the Depression were not the same thing. A lot of rich people lost money in the market, but what made the Great Depression was massive unemployment and accompanying hardship. And this didn't actually begin until like 1930 or 1931. The end of 1929 was actually okay, unless you were a farmer or a stockbroker, obviously. So what did actually cause the Depression? Well, that's a big question, and it's one that economists have struggled with ever since. They want to find out so they can keep it from ever happening again. No pressure, economists. Only 3% of Americans actually owned stock, and the markets recovered a lot of their value by 1930, although they did then go down again because, you know, there was a depression on. And even though big banks and corporations were buying a lot of stock, much of it was with borrowed money, known as margin buying, and all of that still was not nearly a big enough iceberg to sink the world's economy. But if I had to name a single cause of the Great Depression, it might be America's weak banking system. All right, let's go to the thought bubble. Although the Federal Reserve System had been created in 1913, the vast majority of America's banks were small, individual institutions that had to rely on their own resources. When there was a panic and depositors rushed to take money out of the bank, like they do in the obscure art house movie Mary Poppins, the bank went under if it didn't have enough money on reserve. So in 1930, a wave of bank failures began in Louisville that then spread to Indiana, Illinois, Missouri, and eventually Arkansas and North Carolina. As depositors lined up to take their money out before the banks went belly up, banks called in loans and sold assets. Ultimately, this meant that credit froze up, which was what really destroyed the economy. A frozen credit system meant that less money was in circulation, and that led to deflation. Now, you're probably thinking, big deal, deflation can't be as bad as inflation, right? No, deflation is much worse, as anyone who has ever slept on an air mattress knows. When prices drop, businesses cut costs, mainly by laying off workers. These workers then can't buy anything, so inventories continue to build up and prices drop further. Banks weren't lending money, so employers couldn't borrow it to make payroll to pay their workers, and more businesses went bankrupt, leaving more and more workers unable to purchase the goods and services that would keep the businesses open. So if we have to lay the blame for the Great Depression on someone, we can blame the banks.